My name is Leslie. I'm 28, and my entire world is the smell of wet clay, the ringing sound of stacks on wood, and my small, clay and dust-scented studio in Portland, where I seem to have left a piece of my soul in every crack of the floor. I have a family. My parents, my younger sister Madison, a 24-year-old freelance photographer, which in her parlance means taking selfies in the generous California sun and calling it a business strategy while someone else pays her bills. And my grandparents, who, unlike everyone else, look at me with warm, understanding eyes, in which I read the silent question, "Baby, how do you stand it all?" I snatched this business from nothing, tooth and nail, at 22, when all I had was savings reeking of coffee grounds from endless shifts at Starbucks, and a fierce, unwavering stubbornness. A used kiln that creaked like an old steamboat, and a discounted batch of clay. That was my starting capital. For 3 years, I toiled like crazy until my head was spinning, until my fingers ached, building a client base, one cup, one plate at a time, until, by 25, I had my own people, my own orders, and I could finally breathe a sigh of relief and think that, yes, I was capable of something. I was worth something. And on my 25th birthday, the day when I felt like a queen who had built her own flimsy, but still a palace, my grandfather came to the workshop. He stood in the doorway, shifting from foot to foot, a key gleaming in his hand. "A master," he said, his voice trembling, "needs reliable transportation, for clay, for markets, for everything." And he handed me the key to a new Jeep Cherokee. I burst into tears, burying my face in his jacket, which smelled of tobacco and vintage, because it wasn't just a gift. It was faith in me. It was, "I see how you work, and I'm proud of you." This Jeep became my wings. I could fly for the best clay, transport finished dinnerware, set up my stall at the most expensive farmers markets. It changed everything. It was then that my mother, beaming at my celebration, putting her arm around my shoulders, began talking about family balance. The sweet, suffocating word, balance, which in reality meant that everything I touched, everything I built, was now considered common property. It started with small things, yes. They would come into the workshop, Mom and Dad, and their hands, familiar and unceremonious, would reach for the shelves. "Oh, this vase would be perfect for Jane. And these bowls are just made for our patio." They would steal my hours of labor, my charred hopes, giving them to someone else, without even remembering the name of the technique used to make them. They never paid. They never asked. "We're promoting you, Leslie." Mom's voice sounded like a knife scraping against glass when I dared to utter a peep. "Word of mouth, baby. It's priceless." And I felt robbed, but I kept quiet because family. Then it was Madison's turn. "Leslie, honey, can I borrow your Jeep for the day? We need to go to a stunning Instagram location." First for the day, then for the weekend. Then the Jeep seemed to have moved in with her, and I was relegated to the status of on-call renter. My social media feed was filled with her selfies. Madison leaning languidly against my bumper, Madison behind the wheel, Madison smiling against the backdrop of my car, which her followers, of course, assumed was hers. When I desperately needed to get to the market on Saturday, I'd text her, my fingers shaking with frustration. "Madison, I need a Jeep for the downtown market on Saturday." The reply came instantly, cold and smooth as stone. "I can't. I have a shoot. You're always stuck in your workshop anyway. Take an Uber." I'd call my mom, searching for some shred of support. Stupid, stupid me. "Leslie, come on, be reasonable," came the sweet, venomous lecture over the phone. "Madison has important client meetings. She's building the future. Can't you just accommodate her?" "But it's my car, Mom." I exhaled, my chest tightening. A pause. And then came the verdict. "Your grandfather gave it to the family. We all have to make the most of what we have." And then came the requests for money, hanging in the air like a long, relentless rain. Mom called one of those days when I was sweating, loading the kiln, and a new firing promised miracles. Leslie, honey, you won't say no, will you? We need to cover the mortgage this month. Only $2,300. The couple's hours have been cut and we're a bit strapped. We'll pay you back as soon as the tax bill comes, honey. We're family. I wired the money. The tax deduction arrived, was spent on a new porch, as I later learned, and my $2,300 disappeared into the bottomless well of their difficulties. Then came the electricity bills, the water bills, $400 here, $250 there, each time with a whisper of a refund when Madison signs that very contract or when the next payday arrives. The money slipped through your fingers like sand. "Oh, come on," Dad would dismiss me when I finally mustered up the courage to bring it up. "You're a successful business owner. It's not fitting for you to obsess over such trivialities. We're family." Trivialities. Thousands of dollars gutted from my business were just trivialities to them. And then I saw them, those strange alien transactions on my business card statement. $299 for promoting an Instagram post, $149 for follower building services, $89 for some mythical influencer tool. Tiny, impudent numbers lining up in a column of my betrayal. With shaking hands, I called the bank, and the sweet girl on the other end of the line confirmed my wild guess. Madison had somehow linked my card to her accounts and for months had been feeding her fake business with my sweat, my clay, my sleepless nights. I barged in on her as she sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her news feed. "Madison, what's this? You were charging my card." She didn't even look up from her screen, her eyebrows barely daring to rise. "Oh, that's it. I'm just promoting both of us. You should thank me, actually. I'm advertising for you." My ears began to ring. "That's stealing. You took my money without asking." She finally looked at me, and there wasn't a hint of embarrassment in her eyes, only cold, confident irritation. "Mom said everything was fine. It's a joint marketing investment." And when I dialed my mother's number, distraught, her voice poured into my ear like a warm, sticky syrup, drowning me in it. "She's helping you, Leslie. She's getting attention. Why are you always so greedy, so selfish? Can't we just be family?" And then I started keeping a spreadsheet. In the quiet of the studio, under the flickering light of an old lamp, I created a soulless, cruel document in which I recorded every payment, every theft, as if collecting evidence against myself. Every transfer to their mortgage, every light bill I turned off, every unauthorized expenditure by Madison, that $299 for Instagram that burned my soul. I counted every tank of gas filled my Jeep for her trips to the beach, every vase, every bowl my parents irrevocably removed from my shelves. The numbers grew, stacked up into columns, and turned into a total, a monstrous, pulsating total that took my breath away. They were terrifying, not just big, but treacherous, revealing the full depth of the abyss into which I'd meekly poured everything I had. And this year, when the air already smelled of cinnamon and pumpkin, Mom wrote in our family chat, that virtual altar of family lies, about Thanksgiving. The message popped up on the screen, so shameless, so calm. "Darlings, this year's catering will cost $350 per person. Madison can't afford it. She's investing everything in her content. So Leslie will, of course, cover her share. And Leslie, don't forget to pay the car insurance since it's officially yours." I looked at those lines, and time slowed. I had to pay $700 for the right to sit at their table, pay insurance on a car that had become a mirage to me, and at the same time feign gratitude, just smile, while everything inside was turning to ashes. My fingers, accustomed to molding beauty from shapeless clay, now trembled as I typed the reply. "I want my Jeep back, and Madison must immediately unlink my card from all her accounts." Not a request, a statement, a sentence. Mom called instantly, as if she'd been waiting for this pretext, and her voice, usually sweet, now hissed like a hot iron dipped in water. "How dare you? What ingratitude! Your grandfather gave the car to the family, don't you understand? It's our shared resource." "No," I breathed out, and for the first time in a long time, my voice didn't waver. "He gave it to me, for my business. You're selfish, Leslie. Her whisper was more terrifying than a scream. We're trying to help each other, stick together. Help? I laughed, and it was a bitter, trembling sound. When was the last time you helped me? The answer was deafening silence, followed by short beeps. She hung up. Last Saturday, with a box of fragile samples for the fall craft fair, I took a cab. I paid $35 for an Uber because my own car was, as always, in work use at my sister's. I arrived at my grandparents' house, and that house always smelled of salvation, cinnamon, old books, and unconditional love. My parents and Madison were already seated at the table, laden with Grandma's pies. Everyone was already seated when I walked in, awkwardly, box in hand. "Leslie!" Grandpa rose to hug me, his arms firm and secure. Then he pulled away and looked around. "Where's your Jeep, honey?" I opened my mouth to reply, but Mom caught my voice, her tone light as whipped cream and just as rich. "Oh, Madison's using it now. She has so many important things to do, meetings, and Leslie spends her days in the studio with her clay anyway. She doesn't really need it." The silence that fell over the table was thick and resonant. Grandpa's expression changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by a stony, slow understanding. He looked at me, at my eyes, which I knew held all my pain, then at Mom, then back at me. "Wait," his voice was quiet, but with such force that everyone fell silent. "When did the car I personally gave Leslie for her 25th birthday become Madison's car?" Mom snorted, nervously, unnaturally. "Dad, come on. What difference does it make? We share everything in our family. We're not strangers." "I gave it to Leslie," he said, emphasizing each word, "specifically for her business, so she could transport materials and go to markets. I said so outright." "Leslie can take an Uber ride if necessary," Madison said, not looking up from the screen. "It's not fatal." Grandpa's jaw tightened. The vein in his temple twitched. Grandma looked at my mother as if she were seeing her for the first time, with horror and stunned disappointment. But Mom and Dad simply shrugged and started eating, their conversation about the weather ringing out loud and false, drowning out everything else. And on Sunday morning, I woke up to the vibration of my phone. A new chat. Holiday strategy. Mom, with her inexhaustible talent for planning other people's lives, had planned everything. A family booth at the city's main holiday fair. Madison, naturally, is responsible for the photography and the brand aura. Leslie provides the entire ceramics range. "You do so much, baby." Dad handles logistics. But the profit split made me reread the message 3 times because my brain refused to believe it. 60% to Madison for marketing and the original business idea, 20% to the family fund, meaning them, and a measly 20% to me for the materials, as if my hands, my soul poured into each piece were just consumables. I'd had enough. It was the final stone that broke the flimsy dam of my patience. I dialed Grandpa's number, and my voice broke mid-sentence. "Grandpa, can I come over? I need some advice." "Come right now," came the immediate firm reply. "We're waiting for you." An hour later, I was sitting at their kitchen table, covered with a lace tablecloth, and opened my laptop. I silently showed them my spreadsheet, this chronicle of my slavery. Here's the mortgage transfer. Here's the electric bill. Here's the payment for Madison's subscribers. And here's the column with the estimated value of the stolen vases. And gas. Gas for a car I didn't drive. The total, over $15,000, blazed across the screen like a brand. Grandfather leaned back in his chair, his old, intelligent eyes darting over the columns of numbers. He was silent for so long that I heard the ticking of the old wall clock. "Leslie, you are a very kind soul," Grandmother said quietly, her wrinkled hand covering mine. "Perhaps even too much, but it's time to become stronger, a true fortress." "Even with family?" I whispered, my voice trembling treacherously again. "Especially with family, honey," Grandpa said, his gaze devoid of doubt. "When those who are supposed to protect become robbers, what do you want to do?" I clenched my fists, feeling the pain digging into my palms under my nails. I don't know. I don't know. You know, he countered softly but firmly. You're scared. That's normal. But it's time to take back what's yours. Everything, without exception. The car, the money, control of your business. They've been robbing you for years and calling it love. It's time to call a spade a spade. That night, when the silence in my apartment became not frightening but enveloping, I came home from my grandparents and got down to business with a cold, clear determination that finally drove out all that pain and doubt. I sat down at the table, and the digital assault on my own slavery began. I changed every password, from email to bank accounts, from credit cards to business accounts, every social media account, every service where the shadow of my generosity could loom. I called the bank and closed that same joint checking account opened long ago under my mother's sweet talk about a family safety net, and, as the primary owner, simply transferred the remainder, a measly $300, to my personal account, locked with all virtual locks. And then I opened that very spreadsheet, that chronicle of my plunder, and for 3 hours, without stopping, I turned it into a dry, merciless PDF document. Every payment on their mortgage, dated like a calendar of my stupidity, every electricity bill, every water bill, every unauthorized expenditure by Madison on Instagram promotion, garish and vulgar. Every tank of gas bought for my car, not the one I drove. Every vase, every dish swept from the shelves, everything had its own line, its own weight, its own price. The total popped up on the screen, $15,247. $15,247 of my faith, my strength, my life, reduced to dust. I attached this PDF, this digital indictment, to a message in our family chat. My fingers didn't tremble as I typed. Attached is a full financial statement for 3 years, all transfers and unauthorized expenses. Total, $15,247. I demand that my Jeep Cherokee be returned to me by 5 p.m. on Friday. If this doesn't happen, I will file a claim with the insurance company for unauthorized use of a business asset. All access to my accounts and cards has been revoked. No more payments. I pressed send, placed the phone face down on the table, and froze. It vibrated after 30 seconds, insistently, hysterically. I let it. I let it shake with their indignation until it fell silent and then began convulsing again. Finally, I turned it over. Messages popped up, one after another. Mom, are you seriously threatening your mother for money? This is disgusting, Leslie. You're overstepping your bounds. Madison, following suit, with a disdainful smiley face. Seriously, you're acting like a pissed-off child over a car. Grow up, loser. Dad, gravely, like a death sentence. We're family. Family helps. They don't count pennies. You're destroying us with your selfishness. I didn't say a word. I simply turned off notifications, and the silence finally became absolute. For the first time in years, I went to bed without feeling the heavy weight of a debt that wasn't mine. Friday arrived. By 5 p.m., I was standing in my driveway, arms crossed over my chest, waiting, gulping in the cool air. No Jeep. 5:30, an empty street, only the rustling of leaves. Everything was clear. I went back inside, picked up my phone, and dialed the insurance company. My voice was clear and even. I need to report the unauthorized use of my vehicle. The agent carefully wrote down the details. Yes, the Jeep was registered to me, insured in my name, for business purposes. Yes, my sister had been using it for months without my knowledge. The case was filed, its digital echo clicking somewhere in the systems. At 7:30 p.m., the roar of an engine was heard outside, and some guy named Madison pulled up to the shop. She jumped out without looking around, burst through the door, and threw my keys on the table, where they clanked against the wood like shackles. "Here, are you happy now?" Her voice was full of hatred. I looked past her, out the window, at my Jeep, and there I saw a fresh, long, ugly scratch on the passenger door, all the way to the metal. "The gas tank's almost empty, by the way," she called over her shoulder, already heading for the exit. "Don't thank me." And she sped away, leaving behind the smell of cheap perfume and bitterness. I went out to him. The interior looked like a dump. Empty cups, crumpled fast food bags, glitter from makeup on the passenger seat, crumbs. And that scratch is like a scar on my own skin. But it was there. It was mine. Mine again. The next morning, overcoming a lump in my throat, I loaded the Jeep with boxes of ceramics, my children, my legacy, and drove to the farmer's market downtown. I'd missed 3 whole months, 3 opportunities, while my car was chauffeuring my sister to photo shoots. Now I was back. I was just arranging the last vase when, at 9 in the morning, through the bustle of the morning, I saw my grandfather. He approached sedately, silently surveyed my stall, picked up 4 bowls, warm, terracotta, veined with glaze, and counted out the full amount, bill after bill. "Stunning work, master," he said, deliberately loudly, so loud that the neighboring vendors turned to look. "Pure art." And then he unfolded his folding chair right at the entrance to my tent and sat down like a guard, like a silent sentry. At 10 o'clock, Dad showed up. He was shuffling around, rubbing his palms, looking lost and awkward. "Leslie, your mom, she's very upset, unbearably upset." "I'm not discussing money anymore, Dad," I replied, without even turning around, straightening the label on a set of mugs. "I have work." He opened his mouth to say something, but then Grandpa stood up. "Son, can't you see? She's working. Don't disturb people while they work." Dad looked at him, at me, whispered something silently, and left, dejected. An hour later, as I was counting out change for a customer, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A text message from Mom. I read it, and for a second, the world swam. "I gave birth to you. I fed you, raised you. You owe me everything. You owe this family everything. How dare you treat us like this, you selfish freak?" I handed the phone to Grandpa. He read it, his face hardened, and an old, deep sadness flickered in his eyes. "Don't answer," he breathed, handing the phone back. "Such words. There's no answer." And on Sunday afternoon, Grandpa himself called. His voice on the phone was serious and brooked no argument. "Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, Angelo's Cafe, family reunion. Everyone will be there. And you too, Leslie. Be there." He didn't ask, he announced. And then he clicked the receiver off, leaving me alone with the ringing in my ears and the premonition of the final, decisive battle. On Monday, at precisely 2 o'clock, I stepped through the doors of Angelo's Cafe, and the damp air, scented with coffee and old wood, enveloped me like armor. They were already seated there at the large oak table, my parents standing in a united front on one side, and Madison, openly bored and irritated, next to me, scrolling incessantly through her news feed. My grandparents sat at the head of the table, and in front of my grandfather lay 2 thick, dark leather folders, looking implacable and official. I sat across from my parents, on an empty chair, as if intended for a defendant. Silence hung like a heavy, sticky fabric that no one dared tear. My grandfather, without looking at anyone, opened the first folder. Inside lay that very spreadsheet, my confession, printed out and covered with yellow markers, underlining every act of my financial dismemberment. His voice, low and resonant, cut through the silence. For 3 years, Leslie was this family's sole financial contributor. She transferred nearly $15,000 to your mortgage, bills, and other expenses, which were never repaid. She also paid approximately $2,500 in Madison's business expenses, incurred without her knowledge or consent. And for almost 3 years, she was deprived of access to the vehicle I purchased specifically to further her business. That Jeep was a gift from Leslie, personally to Leslie, not from the family trust. Mom, her face beginning to turn red, opened her mouth abruptly. "Dad, you can't just—" but Grandpa merely raised his hand, a commanding and merciless gesture that silenced her mid-sentence. I'm not finished yet. What's been happening all these years has a precise legal and human definition. It's theft. Theft by abuse of trust and theft by shameless exploitation. This is ridiculous, Mom blurted out, her whisper thick with venom. We're family. We share everything. You're destroying us with your legal jargon. Grandpa slowly turned his head toward me, his gaze filled with nothing but firm support. Leslie, now it's your turn. Tell them, what do you want? I took a deep, trembling breath, feeling my lungs fill with the air of freedom I'd been denied for so long. I want all charges on my cards, all access to my accounts, to cease, immediately and permanently. I want a clear, written repayment plan, and I want boundaries, clear, unambiguous. My business is mine alone, and I will no longer financially support your lifestyle. Leslie, dear, Dad began, his voice trying to sound soothing, let's discuss this calmly. But I interrupted him, my voice louder and firmer than I expected. I want it absolutely clear to everyone. My car is mine. My workshop is mine. My creations are mine. No one has the right to take, borrow, or treat anything as shared without my express and explicit permission. Ever. Then Grandpa opened the second folder. Inside were neat, sealed legal documents typed on thick paper. To ensure these boundaries are more than just words, he said, I have established a small trust fund to support Leslie's business. It will provide enough funds to rent a full-fledged, large studio and purchase a second professional pottery wheel. This will allow her to develop independently, without any family interference, or, to put it simply, sabotage. Mom's face turned purple, her eyes wide with disbelief and rage. Are you encouraging her selfishness? You're destroying the family because of her resentments. I encourage honest work and healthy boundaries, Grandpa retorted, calmly but icily. What you call family has long since become a tyranny. Dad leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his gaze darting between me and Grandpa. Look, when Leslie's business gets stronger, when she becomes truly successful, of course she'll be able to help out again. When there are more opportunities... No, my words rang out, crisp and ringing like a hammer striking an anvil. I will not finance your lifestyle. Not now, not tomorrow, never. We raised you! Mom's voice shrieked, losing all pretense of tenderness. We gave you everything. You owe us. You owe us an unpayable debt. I looked up and looked her straight in the face, into those familiar yet suddenly alien eyes. You raised me. Useful. Convenient. Now I choose to be respected. As if on an invisible signal, Mom and Dad stood up simultaneously. The chairs crashed to the floor. They didn't say another word, didn't look at anyone, simply turned and walked toward the exit, their backs straight with overwhelming resentment. Madison snorted, shot me one last look of silent hatred, and trudged after them like a devoted puppy. When the door slammed behind them, a new, pure silence fell over the cafe. Grandpa gently slid the trust fund folder across the table toward me. Grandma reached out and squeezed my hand in her warm, wrinkled fingers. Her eyes sparkled. You're doing great, my dear, she whispered. Really doing great. A few days after that meeting, when the world around me began to take on new, clear contours, I went to view premises for a new studio. And I found it. A corner space in an old brick building with huge, nearly floor-to-ceiling windows that streamed in a perfect northern light, the kind that sculpts form and enlivens color. The rent was more than reasonable, and with the resources of my grandfather's trust fund, I could afford it without a single thought about where I'd get food for the next month. I signed a 6-month lease, and as the fountain pen left my signature on the paper, I felt something heavy and dead being torn from my soul forever. Moving day fell the following Saturday. I called a few friends from the local arts community, people who always offered to help, people I'd previously brushed off, afraid of being indebted, of being useful to someone else. They arrived with trucks and lighthearted jokes. Laughing and shouting over each other, we moved my trusty creaking pottery wheel, the heavy kiln, all the bags of clay, glazes, and boxes of finished products in one incredibly long, meaningful day. The new space was 3 times the size of the old one. There was space here not just for work, but also for thought, for breathing, for living. A separate storage area, a spacious table for packing, and a huge empty floor in the center where you could simply stand and feel. When my friends left, I was left alone. I slowly walked around the perimeter, my palm touching the rough brick wall, the cold glass, my circle. And then I stood in the middle of this empty, sunset-lit floor and simply realized this was mine. Truly, unconditionally, legally and spiritually mine. No one could enter here without my invitation. No one could lay eyes on a vase and simply carry it off. No one could call this a family asset. Mom tried to contact me. The first text came a week later. Leslie, Maddie needs new equipment for her growth, a small amount. Can you help? The second, can I borrow the Jeep for the weekend? Let's go out of town. You're in the workshop anyway. Third, the water bill was huge, unexpected. Help me out, like before? I read each message, and my heart no longer sank with fear or guilt. It was calm. I typed one short, definitive answer. No. No periods, no ellipses, no excuses. Simply, no. After the 3rd week, these requests ceased. The silence that reigned was not oppressive, but blissful. It was the silence of my new, real life, built from scratch. 2 months after that meeting in the cafe, when the rhythm of my new life became as solid and confident as the beating of my heart, I used part of my grandfather's trust fund to buy something. It wasn't just an expense. It was an investment in myself. A new, impressive pottery kiln, replacing my faithful but tired one. The old one still worked, but this one was bigger, more efficient, with precise digital temperature control, and it meant I could fire entire batches at once, take on bold, large orders without worrying about running out of capacity. I also hired an assistant. Jenna, an art student with eyes sparkling with genuine interest, came part-time and helped with the painstaking glazing, wrapped fragile orders in clouds of bubble wrap, and even ran my market stall while I was absorbed in working on the new collection. She called me mentor, and the word made something warm and proud spread its wings inside me. My business, finally free from the constant soul-sucking bloodletting, began to grow so rapidly that sometimes I woke up in the mornings with a slight dread. Will I be able to cope? But it was a sweet fear, a fear of abundance, not of want. I could focus on form, on color, on the flow of clay beneath my fingers, not on how much more I could cut from myself to give away. And then it arrived, a contract that took my breath away. Pacific Handmade Collective, a chain of 6 high-end handmade boutiques in Oregon and Washington, wanted my ceramics on all their shelves. This wasn't just an order, it was a pass to another world, a world of stable, monthly deliveries, a recognizable name, and genuine, not forced, growth. I remember making my first delivery to their flagship store in the heart of Portland. The owner, a woman with gray hair pulled back in a strict bun and a sharp, appraising gaze, silently picked up each bowl, each mug, turning them toward the light, studying the play of glaze. "They're animated," she finally said, the corners of her lips twitching in a semblance of a smile. "Bring twice as many next month." And the world sparkled for me in that moment, with every shade of cobalt and iron oxide. At the same time, custom orders poured in, coming through my finally professionally designed website. One request made my heart skip a beat. A client from Seattle wanted a series of large decorative vases in the ancient Greek style for the interior of his villa. He sent links to museum catalogs and photographs of red figure and black figure painting. For 3 weeks, I lived in the ancient world, studying techniques, transferring the silhouettes of gods and heroes onto tracing paper, mixing pigments, firing, and, holding my breath, opening the kiln to see if I'd succeeded. When I personally delivered the finished vases, the client, an elderly man, paced silently around them for a long time, then wrote a check, adding $800 on top of the agreed-upon amount. "You didn't just make vases," he said, something akin to awe in his eyes. "You placed a story within them. That's priceless." This bonus, these pieces of paper, were warmer than any money I'd ever given to family, because they were mine. Earned. No one could take them away, demand them under the guise of debt. For those months, there was not a peep from my parents or Madison. Complete, deafening radio silence. Sometimes, in rare moments of fatigue, I caught myself wondering, what happened to them? But it was only a fleeting interest, like recalling the plot of an old, unsuccessful book. I wasn't hurt. I didn't care. I was too absorbed in building my own real city. Grandpa called every week, and our coffee meetings became a sacred ritual. I'd go gesturing, telling him about new contracts, capricious clients, the time Jenna nearly glazed the entire warehouse, and he'd listen, nodding, and his smile was the best reward for me. "You're building something real," he'd repeat, "out of clay and fire. That's the strongest thing in the world." And then, one day, about 4 months after I'd drawn my line, he'd stir his cappuccino with a spoon and tentatively mentioned, "You know, Madison, she moved out of her apartment. She moved back in with your parents, into her old room. They say contracts are tight and they can't pay the rent." I took a sip of my latte, feeling the warm, bitter liquid trickle down my throat, and said nothing. "And your mother," he continued, looking at me askance, "stopped inviting her friends over for Sunday breaches. They say she can't afford the cake and champagne everyone's used to anymore." "I see," I said, my voice even and calm, as if I were commenting on the weather. He stared into my face, searching for cracks, pain, remorse. "Does that make you feel bad?" I put my cup down and met his gaze. "No, Grandpa, not bad. Frankly, I let them use me all these years. I gave them money, my car, my work, my time, my energy. They called it family, but family isn't a one-sided deal. It was just exploitation. They took until I was almost empty. And now?" I trailed off, searching for the right words. "And now?" he gently nudged. "And now I have boundaries," I exhaled, "strong as baked clay. I have a business that feeds me and brings me joy. I have a life I choose myself, and I don't regret one bit what remains beyond those boundaries." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand in his warm, strong one. "Good. That's very, very good, Leslie." That night, I stayed late in the studio, finishing a set of dinner plates with a delicate, frost-like relief along the edge. A thick, velvety darkness reigned beyond the huge windows, and only the light from my work lamp created a warm island in it. The kiln, having finished its day's firing, was quietly cooling, emitting barely audible clicks. The humid, peaceful silence of creativity filled the space. My business was flourishing. I had the studio of my dreams. I had friends whose help was mutual, not parasitic. I had my grandparents, my true, unchanging family. And I had myself again, whole, self-respecting, strong. I placed the last plate on the counter, carefully washed the tools, and wiped down the table. 3 new custom orders and a shipment for Pacific Handmade awaited me tomorrow. I turned off the light, locked the door, and climbed into my Jeep. The gas tank was full. I'd filled it myself on the way here. The interior smelled of cleanliness and fresh wax. Only that scratch on the door, long and silvery, was still there. Not like a wound, but like a scar, a reminder of a battle I'd ultimately won. I started the engine, and its steady hum filled me with a deep, unconditional confidence. I was fine. Better than fine. This was my life, and every gram of it, from the clay dust on the floor to the numbers in the bank account, was personally wrought, sculpted, and fired by me. 6 months after I ceased being a convenient resource, life hadn't just changed. It had been reborn, as if after a purifying firing, becoming stronger, brighter, and uniquely mine. My studio, that same corner one with the huge windows, was no longer just a space. It breathed, lived by the rhythm of my work, filled with drying racks of finished pieces, smelling of wet clay, and the creative chaos that was uniquely mine. My client base grew by leaps and bounds, transforming from a list into a substantial order book, and the waiting list for custom work stretched 3 months into the future. Jenna, my student assistant, wasn't just packing anymore. She was confidently seated at the second pottery wheel, and as I watched her fingers, still hesitant but already determined, mimic the movements, I caught myself in a strange, bittersweet sense of teacher pride. She was doing it very well, and a piece of this skill was leaving a part of me into the world. And Pacific Handmade Collective, that blessed network, hadn't just increased their orders, they'd expanded, opening boutiques in Seattle and Olympia, and now they wanted my brand as the exclusive ceramic supplier at all 8 locations. The offer took my breath away, and I quickly had to find a second assistant. It was Marcus, a former school teacher with a soft voice and hands eager to learn something real. He was patient, meticulous, and arrived promptly at 9, his presence bringing a calm, focused atmosphere to the workshop. My income, it tripled. These weren't just numbers in a bank account, it was freedom made real. For the first time in years, I had not just enough money to live on, but savings, a thick, reassuring cushion. I paid bills without squinting, without counting every penny. I could afford the finest silky clay from Vermont and Japanese glazes with a pearlescent sheen. I could, take a day off and just go to the mountains without feeling the twinges of panic over lost income. I bought myself new clothes, not the flashy designer items that Madison considered essential to success, but simple, high-quality pieces made of soft cotton and fine wool that kept my back straight and my shoulders relaxed. I took the Jeep to the dry cleaner, and the technician, while fixing that very scratch, clucked his tongue. It's a deep scratch, but we can handle it. When I picked it up, shiny and smelling clean, the scratch was barely visible, just a thin thread, only noticeable if you knew where to look. And then I invited my grandparents to that very restaurant by the river that I'd previously been afraid to venture into. Over dessert, as they finished their coffee, I tried to express everything that was boiling inside me. I want to thank you, really, for everything. Grandma placed her hand over mine. Baby, you don't need a thank you. We just helped you see yourself as something you were already worth. But you gave me a trust fund, I insisted, feeling a lump in my throat. You gave me a start. Grandpa put down his cup and looked at me with his piercing, wise eyes. Leslie, it was just money. Paper. You did all the real work, the hard, dirty, heartbreaking work, yourself. You built this business from nothing. You set boundaries when everyone screamed at you to break them. You stood up for yourself when it was your worst. We simply believed in you, even when you seemed to have stopped believing in yourself. And then the tears I'd been trying so hard to hold back rolled down my cheeks, right into the expensive restaurant, leaving salty stains on the starched napkin. They always believed. When my parents saw me as nothing more than a functional appendage, a convenient wallet, and free shipping, they saw a person, a treasure, a human being. Our Sunday coffees with Grandpa became a sacred, unbreakable tradition. We'd sit in a cozy hole next to their house, and I'd pour out the week's worth of information to him like jewels from my pocket. A new order for a 12-person dinner service, a fickle glaze that finally settled just right, a stove problem that Marcus and I heroically conquered. He never mentioned my parents or Madison, not even a single word. He respected that silence. But one day, about 8 months after my life had split into before and after, he said, stirring sugar with a spoon, "Your mom came by last week. She asked, you know." I said that from now on, everyone has to steer their own boat, just like you. "So?" I asked, my voice steady. She was offended. She said I was playing favorites. The corners of his lips twitched in a barely perceptible smile. I said yes, that I favor those who work hard, not those who constantly hold out their hand. I laughed, loudly, sincerely, and the sound was so liberating. Laughing about this wasn't just permissible, it was healing. Madison's still there, he added, becoming more serious, still in the same room. She's doing her photography, but apparently it's not very profitable. She complains that the world has forgotten how to appreciate true art. Your parents, they're struggling. They've stung a lot, but they're holding on. Okay, I said. And it was true. I didn't wish them demise. I just desperately wanted their ship to finally set sail from my pier and stop destroying it. Are you sure you're not hurt? His gaze became searching again. No, I breathed out, and it was the most honest admission of my life. I let them take advantage of me for years. I gave and gave and gave, and they only took. They called me selfish when I finally said no. They insisted I owed them because they raised me. But raising a child is a basic responsibility, the bare minimum. That doesn't entitle them to a lifetime of rent from my soul and my labor. Grandfather nodded, and all the wisdom in the world was in his nod. You're absolutely right. I feel good, I continued, and the words flowed naturally, structured and clear. I feel confident. I feel strong. I know how to protect what's mine. And if that's why they call me selfish, well, then I am selfish. You're not selfish, he corrected firmly, his voice like a seal. You're healthy, and that makes a huge difference. These words sank into me like a fire, forever changing my structure. I wasn't selfish. I was healthy. Boundaries didn't make me callous. They made me whole, self-respecting. And my business grew, like a living being. I started teaching workshops on Saturdays. 8 people, 2 hours, laughter, concentrated silence, and mountains of dirty clay. This brought in not only money, but also a sense of community, which I sorely missed. And then a magazine came along, that glossy one about Portland lifestyle. They took photos of my studio, flooded with light, and me, covered head to toe in clay, and asked questions. Did you have family support? The smiling journalist asked. I smiled back, looking straight into the camera. My grandparents are my rock. They believed in me when it mattered most. My parents and Madison remained off camera. They were no longer part of my narrative. They had become a footnote, an experience, not family. And then Alex showed up. From the hardware store where I bought my supplies. He invited me for coffee after helping me load heavy bags of plaster into the Jeep for the 4th time that month. He was calm, with kind eyes, and his own life, separate from mine. Hobbies, friends, plans. He didn't want anything from me except myself. And it was, God, so refreshing, so simple, and so difficult at the same time. Life was good. Not just okay, but richly, intensely good. I had a job that filled me with pride, friends whose respect I didn't buy, but earned. My grandparents, my unshakable haven of unconditional love. A guy who liked me, not my usefulness. Money in the bank that was my protector, not a source of perpetual fear. A future I looked at not with anxiety, but with greedy, joyful interest. And there were boundaries, strong, healthy, built from experience and pain, which I guarded without a trace of guilt. My so-called family thought I owed them everything, for the mere fact of my existence. But I didn't owe them my dreams. I didn't owe them my money, my car, my self-respect. I'd spent years trying to be convenient for them. Now I chose to be happy for myself. And I'd never, not for a single moment, felt better. Every time I sat at the wheel and felt the cool, pliable clay come to life and stretch upward under the pressure of my palms, I thought about how I had sculpted my own life. I had taken a shapeless mass of fear, debt, and other people's expectations and transformed it into something strong, whole, beautiful, and mine. That's what boundaries are for. They don't destroy families, they break vicious cycles. Toxic, suffocating, endless cycles of taking and using. And I broke that cycle. Forever. Completely. And in the silence of my studio, controlled only by me, in the rhythm of my heart and the strength of my hands, I knew this was the most important, the most beautiful thing I had ever created.